One, two, three. And we're on. Are you guys ready? Books and Bars, welcome. My name is Jeff Kamen. Welcome to Books and Bars. Tonight we are talking about We Ride Upon Sticks by Quan Barry. A couple things to mention before we get going. There is a vice presidential debate tonight, so I would like us to be able to catch most of that. So raise your hand, raise your blue hand, and get in on our discussion quickly, and we will get through all that we can tonight. Look forward to this discussion. Quan Barry will also be part of Opus and Olives, and I believe that event with the St. Paul Library, you can still sign up today. I think today is the last day, so check out for signing up with that at thefriends.org. Let's see. Rest in peace, Eddie Van Halen. Guy meant a lot to me. One of my first favorite musicians. Absolutely loved Van Halen. And I was blown away just by his sound, his attitude, always smiling, just a happy guy. Great live performer. If you ever had a chance to catch him, hopefully you did. But he will be missed. So rest in peace, Eddie Van Halen. I have posted a playlist of some of my favorites of his on Twitter. If you guys are interested, check out that playlist. So, but tonight we are talking about Quan Barry's book, and I posted a little bit about the author in the chat, but if you didn't see it yet, please open the chat and I will read it here for you. She was born in Saigon. She's a Vietnamese poet and novelist. Quan Barry was raised on the North Shore of Boston. She earned a BA from the University of, are you ready for this? Virginia, and I'm not going to believe this, an MFA from the University of Michigan. Barry is the author of the poetry collections Asylum, Controvertibles, and Water Puppets, Loose Strife. She was born in Danvers, she was raised in Danvers, Massachusetts, which is where she played on the Danvers High School field hockey team in 1989. She graduated from University of Michigan also, and let's see, she was a Wallace Stegner Fellow at Stanford. And now she is a poetry fellow at the University of Wisconsin, and she teaches at UW-Madison. So sort of a neighbor, very exciting. I would love to hear what you guys thought of this book, especially if I could kick it off with a Gen Xer tonight. I feel like this book was really, really in the wheelhouse of a Gen Xer. I would love to hear from a Gen Xer, and then also I would love to hear from people who are not part of Gen X about what this book meant to them, if it made any sense, or if you have a lot of questions about the 80s. I would love to answer some of those questions if we want to delve into that tonight. I see Andrew has his hand up. So Andrew, I am going to unmute you. And if you would kick us off, my fellow Gen Xer.
I'm not your friend.
You're not my friend? You're my friend? Did I not say you're my friend? What did I say?
I thought you were going to say my friend, but instead you said my fellow Gen Xer.
Yeah, because I made a big deal about the Gen X.
Not quite the same thing.
Andrew, so. I consider you a friend. I don't know if you just
good.
Consider me your moderator, but I consider you my friend.
I've got my Eddie Van Halen headband on just for you. So
it's very cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed this book. I didn't see this book as an incredible work of art, but I did really enjoy it. So one thing that I thought that she did very well, Quan Barry, was kind of recreate the suburban Gen X scene that I grew up in. I was not in New England, but I was in a city that was that had its own character, that was just outside of a major metropolitan area, kind of like Boston. And this book really brought back a lot of memories and made me rethink some things that I had in my own high school and adolescent experience. And it was a lot of fun. So I've got some questions to put out to the group here.
Daddy.
As
Come here.
our dog is probably going to be barking here soon. I've got some questions that I would love to hear some people's opinions on. But in particular, I really enjoyed the aspect that the group had this kind of social media Wiccan type of thing going, where they could all read each other's mind without hearing one another. way prior to social media existing. Like them all sitting around and kind of knowing what they were saying while other people. It was very modern, and just really enjoyed that. And so my questions for the group are whether the aspects of the sexuality that were there. I thought Quan Barry took some real risks. So when I graduated in '93. I felt like the sexuality debates and things that, I mean, it all seemed very familiar to me, in which in my memory, in terms of where things were at and the confusions of the time, or the lack of confusions. But I found myself thinking about the fact that, at that particular time, for a boy, play was still it. A magazine with, you had to get physical copies of and all that. And I just found it kind of really refreshing to find a group of young adolescents that didn't have any, that had basically the same knowledge about sexuality that I had when I was growing up. There was the scene when they were in the bus and they started talking about to the girl that had recently lost her virginity. And I just thought that was such an authentic kind of conversation and very intriguing in terms of the lack of knowledge that group of people had. So my questions for the group are, there were 2 or 3 situations that Quan Barry dealt with that I thought were on the edge, in terms of, like, you have your modern sensibility versus what was going on in the late '80s, early '90s. So Mel and Coach Mullins have an affair as a senior in high school and as an educator, and the story turns out well for them. The book ends with them getting married and having had 5 kids, and it's all worked out just fine. And then, well, yeah, I really like the book. Leave me alone. My wife, I'm getting shade from my wife over here.
She'll have her turn. Tell her to raise her hand.
Yeah, raise your hand, for goodness sakes, if you want to talk. So the other item was Abby and her boyfriend, the date rape boyfriend, where that was kind of dealt with, and then Julie, who was the kind of religious shut-in, who expanded her horizons, but then had a sexual experience that was, both negative and positive as far as she was concerned. She was both crying because all this happened to her, but she was also so excited by it that she was crying, and they beat up the guy's yellow van and all that sort of thing. So I obviously have gone past it, past my time here. I really enjoyed the book. I appreciate you. I never would have read it without you picking it, Jeff. So nice job. I really enjoyed it.
Andrew, there's no time limit. Thank you. So I have 3 things that I think that you are looking for responses from the rest of us on. I will address at least one of them now. The relationship between the coach and one of the players. And then I remember at the end, she says, or in we need to talk about the first person plural, the sort of the we of it all. It said, well, these are one of the situations where you never really know how things are going to go until maybe like 30 years later. And it kind of says, yeah, this could have been pretty dicey. Like, this isn't necessarily initially appropriate, right? I mean, the fact that I hooked up with my coach, but hey, we're married and we have all these kids, and I'm saying it's okay and it's good, even if you think, dear reader, that this might have been inappropriate. And yeah, reading this in 2020, definitely red flags go up for me. And I was like, I don't know if I like this subplot right now of the coach and everything, and what's going to happen here. And then the surprise that it all is okay, and we're supposed to just be okay with it, I guess. I don't know. I mean, as a fellow Gen Xer and friend, you can probably remember there was a certain sort of, not that it was okay, but, even 10, 15 years ago, it wasn't called out as much, this older, especially older men, younger women, and even, almost like famous people like dating people in high school and stuff like that. Not saying it's appropriate in any way, but culturally and socially at the time, it was probably less of a thing. In this case, being like a teacher-student kind of thing, really not great. But I don't know. I mean, I'd love to hear what other people think about that, especially knowing how it turns out. If then do you take the woman's word for it here and say, okay, it was okay, but can she know at 17, can she know that was okay and appropriate, that relationship? And then you also wanted to hear about Abby and the date rape aspect of that relationship, and Julie and the religious and then the experience that she has. So anyone else, please raise your hand. If you don't know how, at the bottom, you can raise your little blue hand. I will call on you, unmute you. Until we get some of those to respond to this, or if you have something, jump on in. But anyone not Gen X that wants to speak to the not, being Gen X reading this and how this came across to them. And maybe, if you need an icebreaker, do you have a favorite Van Halen song? I mean, I'd love to hear it. I'll put it on a list. Donna's got her hand up. Donna, I'm unmuting you. Talk to us.
Okay, first I'll just respond to, I love the questions that Andrew asked about the whole sexuality piece, but I will say that I really didn't find out, did any of us find out until way toward the end that it was actually a true story that the coach was involved with somebody. I think it would have been, he got flashed at one point by somebody, Julie or somebody. And I somehow thought that maybe that he was being set up or something. I thought it wasn't until toward the end that we realized, no, that was true, that he actually was involved with a student. And I think it would have been way creepier for me reading it if it had been true all along. And by the time we really find out about it, it turns out it's kind of okay. I mean, it worked out okay. But as a non-Gen Xer, I will say that it really brought back a lot of memories of the 80s and when my kids were growing up. And that was one piece I enjoyed. I mean, I thought the book was a little bit too long, and I thought there were a few too many characters. I mean, it was this whole team of players, and I really had some struggles trying to keep them all straight, and they all had interesting backstories, very unique backstories. But just trying to keep it all straight was a little bit of a challenge. But I will say that some of those riffs, I mean, the author would go on these whole thing. I mean, even one example that comes to mind, and when she's just talking about that prom night, what restaurant they go to, oh my gosh, it's a whole riff on Restaurant Row and all the different restaurants and the themes and the decor and all that stuff. That was so 80s. And then there were other times where they talked about like what was going on in TV shows or what was going on in music. And she really had a very impressive grasp of popular culture in the 80s, that she just dropped these little bits all along and then would just fill it with details that I chuckled out loud at. But that said, I think my main point was that I thought it could have been pared down a little bit. I didn't need quite that many games to have the plot develop and how this was all going to culminate in going to state and so on. But anyway, yeah, I thought Andrew's questions were very provocative about the sexuality and the people that turned out to be gay and so on, and seeing their struggle. And I think that really was very 80s and pretty beautifully handled.
Thanks, Donna. So what I've read in interviews with Quan Barry, she does not like to research. And so for her to write about 1989 Danvers, that is what she lived and that is what she knows. And she said there were many times, especially speaking about the restaurants, where she just wrote what she remembered, and then Penguin Random House had to fact check a lot of this, and she was only ever off by a few things, and they only ever had to be like, oh, it was just this word instead of this word, and it's really, that was Danvers that she captured, and in the restaurants there, and the 80s, and what she knew and what she remembered. I mean, I I think that, I laughed just about every time the Claw as a character, just a hairstyle as a character. I mean, when you think about it, the amount of times that at first it almost seemed like she was going to write about it too much, but it got me every time a different way. It was as though the character was expressing themselves through the Claw. And back to the first, or the first person plural. The other time I can think of it being used, especially in a similar setting, was Jeffrey Eugenides' Virgin Suicides. That is told from the point of view of the boys. It's in a first person plural of this group of teenage boys that likes these girls. It's a really good book. And Quan Barry has stated that as sort of an idea that she took from that, but wanted to apply it to the girls. And when she is taking on the 80s, even though she's doing this from memory and wanting it to be true, she is trying to look at the 80s, she said, from like a more modern perspective, and kind of like, let's examine a couple of these things, and she did want to go back and put in characters that, let's see, maybe not just the standard character, but let's get a little, some more diversity in here. Let's hear a little bit about more of the inner life of, and they're finding out about sex and their own identity. And for her, it was really about a book about identity, she has said, and really these characters finding what their identities are, more so than the magic or the witchcraft, which I would also like to talk about how that affected your reading of this. So please raise your hand if anyone has anything on what we've brought up so far tonight, or anything else that you want to bring up. And if anyone sees something in the chat that's worth bringing to the main group, bring it up too. But so she has said also that there's no I in team. This is Quan Barry saying, but that's why she wanted this idea of a team I, is what she wrote for this, that it was like a team collective that's telling the story. And there are a lot of chapters, a lot of games, and a lot of characters, but the idea was that the entire team is represented, pretty much gets like a chapter also. So like you get like an inner life of almost everybody on the team. So that's why there's 11 of those. And it might've gotten a little long. I could maybe agree with that too. Anyone have any thoughts on, favorite characters? Anyone on Boy Corey? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I see Pete's got his hand up. He's a fresh hand. Pete, may I unmute you? Talk to us, Pete.
Sure. Hey, good to see everybody here too.
Good to see you, Pete.
Yeah, I love the book.
What'd you love about it, Pete?
The writing was just brilliant. She's so funny. I think it's the funniest author I've run into since Christopher Moore. But the plot is so tight all the way along. And even for being long, it wasn't long for me because I was just so invested in all these characters. I thought you did a wonderful job. And as far as the sexuality stuff, where I'll just leave that in the sense that she's just telling the story of these women and girls that this is just what it was. This is just what they went through. But what I thought was the community of these women were it was just remarkable how they grew together. I think the witchcraft and the coven stuff was almost metaphorical. What Carolyn and Lisa talk about, I kind of got a sense of their book club in this, where these wonderful women are so supportive of each other. And it was so moving. And a couple things I'll bring up is like Abby, I loved her at the beginning, where she was a real leader in the sense that she could have put the kibosh on the whole thing becoming witchcraft, but she didn't. She said, all right, sometimes you got to follow. And then I loved it at the last chapter where there was one point where she rattled off, she hadn't touched a stick in a while, and she rattled off 5 penalty shots out of nowhere, proving she definitely could have made that shot in the big game. But I think that act was real leadership too, because she was liberating the team from Emilio, in the sense that now they could just really believe in each other. It's not some other power, it's their own power, and it comes from all of them. And it was really touching at the very end when they're all doing their witchy nakedness stuff again, but the tattoos on their arms that independently or together, who knows, but they all got them. And I just thought that was beautiful. It was just so touching that, and these people came through their life together and ended up there. It's just, and then a favorite character to answer that one, for me, it's little Smitty. I loved how she started out like kind of, even in her own description of herself, I was just a vacuum, you know, I was just going through the motions. I knew what I was supposed to do. And then every chapter they evolved. It's like, you know, it just get more absurd. It's just like the Pulitzer Prize for the author. But meanwhile, the big thing is she gets in the town paper. But little Smitty, where I just really belly laughed when she showed up with that Satan mask and her stogie, scared everyone. But it was just, but it's just, you know, she's just finding herself and her own identity. And I thought that was awesome. And but there's just so many great characters here. You can go on all night, and I'd like to hear other people.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Well, a couple of your points I want to address. This is a very funny book, and I gotta say, back to back, we have, I think, two of our funniest books, because I think our next book, Nothing to See Here, is the funniest book. Yeah, but these two back to back were just really funny. As far as the witchcraft, I agree with you, and I don't want to sway anyone else's opinion though, but the more I think about it, I think the point of it is that there actually was no magic, and that it was all, you know, it was all just these girls being teens, being together, and they did this. Kind of funny how Quan Barry got to it being Emilio Estevez as the Notebook. She said, I certainly could have used Keanu Reeves, but that wouldn't have rung true to some people because he's still a current heartthrob. She's like, I needed to have somebody who is no longer a heartthrob, but was a huge heartthrob at the time. And so she's like, so I picked Emilio Estevez instead of like a Keanu Reeves type. I thought that was kind of funny. And then you also, when you bring up, the ending with sort of the big dance and stuff. I mean, I thought what you were going to say. I really would also love to hear people's thoughts on how it seems like we're driving towards, you know, this big final game, and then the final game is like an afterthought, and it's more about, you know, the reunion many years later and seeing where are they now sort of thing, which I always love when there's a group of characters that you really, really like to get that sort of, you know, that where are they now, you know, kind of thing, like years later. It was great. So I really liked sort of the epilogue of it all, whether, even though the game was sort of an afterthought. I see Kara has her hand up. Kara, may I unmute you? Talk to us, please.
Yeah. So I am really appreciating hearing what people think, because I didn't really dislike it, but I didn't like it. Like there were parts I really enjoyed, like certain like times when they really went in depth on individual characters, but like I found all of the sports stuff incredibly boring, and I like would read it and I would just be like, I don't care about field hockey. And I just I don't know, all the parts were all of them together too. I kind of felt it hard to keep track, and I didn't get that they were going for a collectivist voice at first. I was like, oh, so which perspective is it? So I kept going back to like the beginning page where it lists all of the names, and I was like, well, it's not this person, it's not this person, it's not this person. And then finally I was like, oh, okay, like Quan Barry's doing a thing. It's none of them, it's all of them. And at that point I was like, well, I couldn't figure it out. And so there were like a lot of like individual moments I really liked though. I think Little Smitty was also my favorite character, and I thought like the best part was in the end when like they're all naked and their like parents show up, and like her grandma shows up and she's like, I think I hate men, and the grandma's like, ha ha ha, and I was like, that was my favorite part. I thought that was so cute. So yeah, for me as a book, it was a lot of characters, and I would get really interested in something and then it would switch to another situation, and I would get frustrated because I was like, I want more of that and less of other things. So I almost thought it would be better as like a series of television. Like, I think like, you know, visualizing it, I'd be able to like enjoy all of the characters more. The other thing that I liked, but also I kind of had weird feelings about was in regards to like gender and sexuality. Like to me, it was super idyllic. And like I grew up in the 90s and the early 2000s, and I was like, I guess I was in a small town and they're in like Danvers, Massachusetts, which is like, I don't know the population, but I was like, man, I wish like my childhood had been that accepting, and like it just seemed so modern to me, like in terms of how they did it. I was reading another book at the same time that takes place in the 80s, but it's about the AIDS epidemic, and a guy that goes to a small town during the AIDS epidemic, and he has AIDS, and it's incredibly sad, and that felt much more realistic. But if this is like realistic, then that makes me very happy for the queer people who are growing up there. So I don't know, I just felt weird about it because I was like, that's not my experience at all as like a high school queer person. And you know, I don't know. So I enjoyed it. It was like comforting and like nice to read about. I don't love reading about homophobia, but like I was also just like, huh, all right, that's interesting. It's really great that like this group of, you know, young people in the 80s could be so like loving and accepting of each other. So that was nice and also weird to me.
You know, it's an excellent point, and I can't speak for whether, I don't know if Barry was saying that that's the way it was for her growing up, or if she's saying this is the way it could have been or should have been, or since this is fiction, you know, I wish it was like this. I don't know that. Unfortunately, I can say that, I mean, where I grew up, I don't think it would have been like this. It wasn't the same, you know, and, you know, there were things that were said and things that were done that we certainly, you know, I mean, my kids wouldn't do today in high school, or they would, you know, you'd get expelled. You know, I think that attitudes were different back then,
Yeah.
and
Well,
not in a good way.
It's
But
not a complaint, because reading
yeah.
a book about a bunch of like, you know, queer non-white teens who like suffer for it would not have been fun, and I wouldn't have really wanted to read that. But I thought it was an interesting contrast in terms of the other book I was reading is called The Prettiest Star, and it's extremely good, but extremely sad.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that this one then was maybe at least a little less sad for that part, but I can't speak to that, and I wish, if anyone knows, if anyone has maybe read or heard Quan Barry speak to this, but I think your point, I have heard from other people, and in some of the reviews I think I have seen, you know, said, and you know, I can't speak to that personally. So but I appreciate your perspective on it, and thank you for sharing that with us. And you not being Gen X also, you know, being our first to chime in, your thoughts on that. Well, I guess Donna said she wasn't Gen X either, but she looks like she's Gen X to me. All right, Lisa, I see your hand is up. May I unmute you? Speak to us. Lisa, your husband has ceded the floor to you, it looks like.
He's very close. I could actually like hit him. Why don't you turn yours off? Mute yourself and I can unmute. All right. I think we've got our technology figured out.
Yeah.
So I was thinking back to the witchcraft thing.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting that they just needed something to push them to their maximum potential.
Mm-hmm.
And they all did have this great bonding thing. And I love that, like Cara said, that they were able to accept each other, and the happiness of them being together and getting the strength from that. But it's the witchcraft thing was just amazing to me, because I kept thinking it's just really empowerment. It's like, it's their empowerment. And to me, the whole story was about, like, what would it take for you to become the best person you could be? Like, you know, it was clearly a tool that was just used, right? being affirmed by this, and they believed in it at the time, and what forced them forward when they didn't. They clearly had the ability to do it. And then when you got to the end of the book and you found out that they all turned out to be very happy and successful, you know, that they just like got something that pushed them to their top success. And so that was my thing, when my takeaway with it. I was just like, witchcraft equals empowerment, man. Like, what would it take? Like, would I, particularly when you're in high school, right? I mean, now it probably would be something very, very different, but in high school, you know, what would you need to believe in yourself? And, you know, sometimes it's like having just that one person say the right to you, or having that one group of friends that sticks by you, or whatever. And so I love the book, and I gave it 5 stars because I laughed along with it, and I felt pain thinking back to high school in the 80s and all the crap that you had to go through when you were in high school. And but you know, I felt like the success for these this group of girls and boy Corey to have each other, and as they were going through the games, which, like Donna said, it was like, oh my God, now there's another game. But each time we got there, it explored somebody else and gave another person strength, and I kept seeing it build. Like, that's how I felt it. It was going through that. It was building in strength for the whole team as they were getting towards the end and going to that final game. So yeah, I was amazed by her storytelling ability, despite the fact that there was all this stuff going on and all the people. I mean, there's so many things that she added into it, and I thought she did a really good job with it. And I kind of needed the feel good thing, so that felt good. And I do want to say I've read next time the book for next, I would say next month, but we can't say that anymore. Second month.
2 weeks from now.
And 2 weeks from now. And that one is quite funny too. But I think that there's a lot going on in that book too that is the same thing, where it's like it's funny and humorous, but when you start breaking down what's actually happening, it makes you think about those relationships too, like that. But it makes it a interesting read, having and being it light. So I appreciate the fact that you've given us these nice light reads, but still they have a lot of conversation and a lot of discussion stuff to it.
Well, thank you very much. I'm always looking for, my number one quality in the book is that it is discussion worthy. So, and sometimes I don't know if it's going to be or not. And sometimes I'm afraid that we're not going to find the thing to talk about together. But normally, you know, we do. And we do have some hands up still, which is good. I want to address a couple of your points. Yeah, I'm normally the person that does want to believe in, like, if you told me that they were probably witches, I was like, oh, great. Like, I want there to be powers, and I want it to be, you know, that sort of supernatural sort of thing. But by the time I got to the end of this one, I was in that case of, I didn't want it to be anything supernatural. I wanted it to be just a group of friends that got through this together and found that, like you said, that whatever that motivation was that they needed. Yeah, so I'm glad that you found also in our next book, Nothing to See Here, the thing that I'm thinking of too, because I think that there is some real emotional depth to both of these books, as light and funny as they seem on the surface. And the next one is quite short, that we're doing on Tuesday, October 20th, because my anniversary is Wednesday, October 21st. So Evelyn's got her hand up. Evelyn, may I unmute you? Speak to us, please.
Hi everyone.
Hi.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I think you're right, it probably wasn't like a real power, although I mean, it wasn't like a witch power, I should say. Oh, there is power in like sticking together, and you know, that collectiveness that they were able to have. Honestly, I haven't finished the book, so I don't know exactly the ins and outs of everything that happens, but like to address what Kara was saying a little bit about sort of the happy side of the the queer experience. I think there was definitely enough allusion, I think, to, you know, being teased and having a hard time going through school for a lot of the, you know, queer characters or the suspected queer characters. But I think the acceptance was really found within the team. I mean, that's what I'm seeing so far. So it was good that they all accepted each other, and especially at the beginning, there was a lot of like wording around the suspected queerness of like other teammates, as in like, not that that was any of our business or that kind of wording, which I feel like evolved over time into more of an acceptance rather than a tolerance. Yeah. I thought their time during Salem was really interesting. Soo Yoon, I think, was probably the character I most liked or associated myself with. I loved how she had to like bike her way through all these TV shows just to like get American culture. That was fantastic. That whole thing was fantastic. And how she sort of became an amalgam of all of her favorite like American TV shows, like just took whatever she liked out of all of them, and that's how she chose to be. I really enjoyed that. And when they went to the fortune teller in her chapter, and the fortune teller tells them, you know, they really need to trust each other. And so like that also means to open up to each other. And so I think from there they start to like learn more about each other. And then Sue going and getting her fortune told, and like the really result is to just be like, fuck them, and it saved her, it says, years of therapy. So I guess they all saved themselves years and years of therapy by like just fuck them. So that's I loved all of that, and the voice, the collective voice was awesome. I really enjoyed that as well. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you. I see that Donna has her hand up. Donna, on YouTube.
Yeah. I got a kick out of Evelyn saying how they learned how there was power in sticking together, because I think the page, when Lisa was talking about how it was really their collective strength as a team that was empowering, not the witchcraft. There was that great part on, I think it was on page 170, where it was that Halloween night where they decide they're just going to wear their uniforms and that's their costume. And they say, oh, and let's get our sticks. And the other people would say, oh, well, what's the deal with the sticks? And they're saying, oh, well, they realized there was power in their sticks. I mean, their actual game field hockey sticks. And they said, we ride upon sticks. This is how we get where we're going. And I thought there was a lot of symbolism in that, because we ride on sticks is kind of like the witches and that kind of thing. And there was a little part where they admired the logo, the mascot for those Salem witches, that team, because they actually had a witch riding on a stick was their mascot. And it was one of the only female mascots of any sports team they'd ever seen, and so on. But I thought, no, their power is in themselves as a team. And as the mother of a hockey player, my daughter played hockey in high school, and there is that whole sense of power in the uniforms and the sticks and everything. That was really kind of cool. But I will say one other thing about my favorite character, I think, was AJ, in the sense that I think that this author did a nice job of bringing in some of the racial pieces and racial identity. And she was the one that had, I mean, her whole backstory about her parents both being doctors, but nobody would address them as doctor. And when they played the team that actually had like about a third of them, I think, were, as they said, brown players, they actually knew AJ and they knew her first name. And the narrator is saying, what else about AJ did we not know? We had no idea that she even had a different first name. And all of and with the other characters too that were like Sue, and then there was Julie. I mean, there were other characters too that were trying to find themselves and where they fit into America and where they fit into the American culture, and where they and AJ at one point says, how would my life be different if I could turn myself inside out, so that people didn't see me first as Black and then as who else I was. And I thought that part was pretty timely for today. And the last thing I'll just say, I think this was the first book I've ever read that's first person omniscient. I mean, it's like, it's not just first person, it's first person omniscient. I mean, this narrator, the collective narrator, knew everything about everybody. And I don't know, Jeff, you referenced another book that did that, something like that, but I've never read another book that was first person omniscient. So that was kind of a trip.
Yes, the book I mentioned was The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides. He also wrote Middlesex.
Yeah, I've read his other stuff.
Yeah, I don't know if that narrator is omniscient in that case. That'd be an interesting thing to check out, but it's a similar situation. And I like that you brought up the titular line. When the titular line was said on Halloween, we ride upon six. Yes, great meaning. One of the things I learned was the difference between lacrosse and field hockey. I think I just combined like those. I just assumed that was the same sport or something, and I didn't really, until this book, figure that out. In fact, I think I thought this was about lacrosse at first, and then I was like, oh, field hockey. Oh, that's not lacrosse. Okay. It just wasn't. I think it's a bigger thing on the East Coast, maybe. I don't know. I don't remember it being necessarily. I remember jokes about lacrosse in college, like everyone had shirts that said co-ed naked lacrosse, which that was just, I don't know, a 90s thing. But yeah, really cheap t-shirts. And then I won't say, unless you ask me offline, what some people in the 80s may have referred to lacrosse or field hockey as for a sport. There was a term that I heard for it, but I won't do it in the video. So this is a reason to catch me offline. Yeah, so yeah, and I showed I love when they show in the printed book, you get a picture of the witch logo, and I kind of showed it to the camera. So yeah, that being jealous of that, but there is power in a uniform and in this like bonding thing of this idea of, you know, we're all wearing the same thing and we're holding this, and it adds to that sense, that collectiveness, and that it was just another way that they empowered themselves, like by being together and by being a team. You know, that's why I want us all to wear the same shirts. And Donna, you give me a great idea for an icebreaker maybe next time. Show your bookshelves, because you are in front of like what looks like a nice library there. And if maybe, you know, as an icebreaker, if people want to show us, you know, some of their bookshelves, we could see that might be cool. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. Last time we saw our pets, maybe next time we see our shelves or something like that. But we didn't call it in time. But Donna, you look like you're in a good room for this. So thanks again. Kara, you're with us still. I'm unmuting you. Talk to us, please.
Yeah. Donna and I are very much on the same wavelength, because I was also going to bring up AJ. I think AJ was one of the perspectives that I was like, one of the reasons I would get frustrated with the book is because I'd be reading AJ's perspective and then we'd move on to someone else and I'd be like, no, more AJ. And I that's an area that I feel like they did some interesting commentary, but they like then just kind of like wrapped it up, and I was like, no, we need more. And it was the like kind of like race dynamics like in their group of friends, because obviously they're very good friends and they've lasted, you know, until I guess they're in their 40s at the very end of the book. I'm amazed at that. Maybe that's another thing people can bring up. Like, how many friends from high school do you still have? I am 10 years out of high school and I have one. And I'm like not even in contact with any others. So that was another experience where I was like not relatable. Looks like Gwendolyn she has the opposite experience of me. But I thought the race dynamics were super interesting and AJ seemed to be the one that was the most aware of them. And I kind of felt like frustrated on AJ's behalf, because I kind of felt like AJ understood that she kind of had to be like an extra ally to like these other non-white girls, but they didn't necessarily like see it the same way like towards her, and so they would both do things that like now we would say like, oh, that's like racist, or that's like anti-blackness, like especially with it's I can't remember what the name of the person who is playing Tituba, and was it Julie? Is that the name? I finished this a month ago, so now there's too many names for me to keep track of. And like I remember like again when I was in high school, like putting on the Crucible was like a discussion, because like in my year there weren't like any kids who were Black, and in the class that we put it on, it was like all white kids, and having like a white person play Tituba was like a topic of discussion, and like how to do it, and like putting on an accent, and I just I thought there was like not enough commentary. Like the only like non-white person in this cast was cast to play like the Black character, even though she's not Black, and she definitely was putting on an accent. And so race dynamics were interesting. Like I think that's another I wonder if like other people have written about this, but like if any Black people have written about like what it was like if you grew up in that time period and you had like an not all white, because like they had some other non-white characters, but to not have like any other kind of Black friends that understood your struggle, and to kind of have that be your main group of friends in such a strong period of life. It just seems like AJ has a lot of stuff going on that she's not getting support with. So I wanted more from AJ, and I wanted AJ to like, I don't know, have all of the good things happen to her.
Thanks. Yeah, I recently saw a high school production of The Crucible. And I do still have a very good friend from high school. I have a few other friends from high school, and mostly just people that I'm in touch with on social media, though. But it's it's a group that gets together, for things like every few years or whatever. But yeah, my main core group of friends is the college friends. But yeah, I mean, I find that people in Minnesota tend to have really long lasting friendships from like grade school and high school and everywhere. Cause when I moved here, there were people that were like, oh, this is my friend. He lives across the street. Yeah, we've been friends since, 5th grade or whatever. And they're neighbors and friends and all this stuff. And it seems like a lot of people in Minnesota are like that, which can be good, I guess. So yes.
This is Rebecca. I'm going to sneak in because I'm not I can't raise my hand.
Yes, please do.
A few things, like all your comments. I'm older than this group, so I grew up in the 70s, high school time. But a lot of is that person gay or not resonated very well. There was casual racism, there was casual homophobism, there was casual lots of all the isms. And we didn't really think that hard about it. So I'm not going to be hard on the book about it because I think it kind of reflects it. I know there's kind of a 21st century reflection back on the 19th century or 20th century, but it felt true. And in other words, and I wouldn't have wanted it to be too preachy or too judgy, I guess. I do think it was chaotic. There was a lot going on, and because it was a collective mind, I can kind of accept that. It disturbed me in the beginning. It took me like, I don't know, at least 5 games to get really into it. Once I realized the collective narrator, etc. I haven't finalized it yet, but this is a killer playlist. I actually looked to see if anybody had developed a playlist from this, but I may have played a few of the songs from it. I had forgotten about some of these. And it felt very true to my, I don't know, adolescent or, older adolescent heart. I did have a friend who slept with a coach in high school. So that was felt real to me too. And it was, of course, very, very quiet. I was probably one of only two people who knew this coach was a true jerk, and it was definitely not appropriate, but it was one of the things that happened. And the making the story not about them winning, but instead staying connected, I really like that. I think if any group of people had gone on a winning team like this, my brother in high school was on they won state in football, and he remained so tight with that team. And that's because they had undergone a bit of and I know this is not the right word, but a crucible. They had bonded together in a way. They had collectively pulled out of themselves more than what they had individually. And so I don't think it's unlikely that they would have stayed together, especially because they were from a small town. You know, those of us who grew up in bigger metropolitan cities were more distracted, I would say, or probably had different circles of friends more likely. You know, you'd have a different grade school, and I don't know. So I did not find that part to be inauthentic. The person I most related to was Heather. And Heather, for me, I have a friend named Heather who is incredibly smart, incredibly, what's the word? Not just follows the rules, but determines what the rules are in some ways, helps people collectively, but also can be a lot. So I kind of had fun when I was reading Heather in the book, thinking about Heather, my friend. I'm actually very glad I read this book. I think it was a real fresh kind of a voice. It was difficult at first, but I find that difficult things are actually make me love them more in the end. If it's too easy, I forget about it. And I think I would like to go back through and actually make that playlist in the order that she references them, and maybe read some of the more specific little, I mean, there were so many little great stories. She couldn't hardly contain herself, Donna. She would just go on and on, you know, telling more and more and more. And you could tell that this was an author who loved that part of herself. And if she's a poet and uses words like this, then that's, it felt appropriate, and she was authentic to her voice. And I'll stop talking now, but I really enjoyed the book.
Rebecca, I would love to hear the playlist when you compile it. I think that's a great idea. I saw an interview with Quan, and someone asked her, you know, has she done that? And she hasn't. And the guy was kind of like, I can't believe it. You're missing out. Like, and I mean, anyway, I've done this for these kind of books before too. There were so many at a certain point that I didn't actually search. It's all over the place. And I like that. I like there was also that push pull of, you know, commentary on some of it, like, oh, now they're playing, you know, this kind of stuff. And, you know, it was a mix of Def Leppard, Bruce Springsteen, Prince, you know, everything. It really encapsulated, you know,
Janet Jackson.
Yeah, great stuff. Well, thank you. Thanks for jumping in and for addressing many of our points tonight. I see Andrew still with us, and his hand is up. So Lisa must have handed him back the mic, and Andrew, you may speak.
So everyone go watch the debate. I'm sure Kamala Harris will do fantastic. But I just want to say that the very authentic to me. That it spoke to where I grew up, and it felt for good and for ill very similar to what I experienced when I grew up. And I do have friends from high school. Not shy about it. It's very, very, very nice. We play poker and all kinds of fun things like that. But I really do feel like this talked about an experience in a place that was very authentic. Not the same for everybody, for sure, whether you're talking about a demographic shift in the time, or whether you're living in a city or in a very small town or something like that. But for whatever reason, it really struck me as being a very authentic in the way that it described these experiences. And, you know, I found myself saying very frequently, wow, that makes sense. about this person that I remembered, or this experience that I had, or the way this thing turned out. It was, I thought it was just very insightful for the kind of experience that I had. Certainly not for everyone, but I just really enjoyed the book. Thanks for picking this one. It was a lot of fun.
Well, thanks again, Andrew, my friend Andrew. These books are only as good as the discussions that we all have with them. And yes, thanks for your shout out to Eddie Van Halen there. Does anyone else want to say anything else that we haven't touched on yet? Anyone not had a chance? Anyone maybe put something in the chat that we didn't get to address? Feel free to speak up now. I want to remind everybody that our next one is a Tuesday. It's Tuesday, October 20th. The book is Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson. It's short, it's very funny, but it packs an emotional punch. And if you have an opportunity to try the audio book, I can't recommend it more highly. It's one of the best performances I've listened to in a long time. And I was just like literally laughing out loud with like one earpiece in, walking the dog with my wife, also laughing at the same thing. And we've gotten many people to check it out. I hope you like it and can join us on a Tuesday. I want to thank the Friends of the St. Paul Library for their support, and do check out Opus and Olives and Quan Barry if you can sign up today still. And we have our books picked through the rest of the year. And I've posted a list also of things I'm thinking about for 2021, and that is in that bookshop.org books and bars list. The link is in the chat. I'll post it again for you guys to check out. I got about 30 or so books in there right now, and I don't know if we'll always do twice a month in